Hello, Reignite family. I'm really sorry this isn't a positive or uplifting video, but I got some really sound advice and I feel like I absolutely have to make this video to prepare to protect myself and other proud anti-vaxxers and anti-bad government groups in Australia. Now, we wouldn't be anti-government if the government was not corrupt and actually cared about the people. So I'll put that on record. And before I do talk about it, so basically this video is it's a reaction to the train murders in Queensland, and I'll explain why this video is so important for everyone in the freedom movement. So I've got some disclaimers first, and it should be assumed, but I'll say it just in case it's not, that I am very sorry for the fatalities. It's obviously disgusting and unforgivable in every way, shape and form. I have never and never will condone any types of violence, whether in a small way or a large way. Secondly, online history should obviously be investigated. If they belong to anti-government violent groups, that is something that obviously should be taken into account. The reason I'm making this video is that the online narrative from this tragic incident, which by the way, I think is really disrespectful to the victims and their families, is becoming really concerning. It seems to have been politicized in a particular way, and I'm going to explain what I mean. I'm going to go through the examples, and I'm going to put all the links to what I use in the description as well. The first thing I want to show you is this, which is really unfortunate, but I really want to get on the front foot of this. There are some similarities between myself and the female in terms of looks. Now, I've seen this photo passed around online, and when I saw this image, I immediately thought that her image has obviously been doctored to look a little bit like me. Turns out it hasn't. It turns out we do have some visual similarities, and I just want to put on record that I don't know this woman. She's not my sister. She's not my cousin. I have no idea who she is. I'm putting that on record because the similarities are uncanny, and I want to confront it head on. My overwhelming concern here is the constant reference to broad slogans like anti-government, anti-vax, anti-authority, sovereign citizens, and the constant use of conspiracy theorists. They even mention freedom rallies in there. Now, does this play a role in their investigation? Of course it does. If these people are a part of these types of groups, of course it plays a role, but it's not the sole source of evidence, is it? Well, it shouldn't be, but the narrative kind of paints it to be. My concern is that the broad brush of these types of words they've intentionally included in these terms a huge portion of the Australian population. I was in Canberra in February 2022. There were at least 500,000 attendees there, if not more. I saw almost 600,000 people at the rally in Melbourne to protest a pandemic bill that got passed late last year, despite all those numbers. So is the mainstream media, and people like Peter Dutton, by the way, attempting to create a narrative that these actions are directly a result of them being a conspiracy theorist and an anti-vaxxer? That's a question I'm wondering is happening. Is it being politicized? It really feels like it is. There's not that much mention about, their background, their mental health, their family status. Well, there is, obviously they've got a strange, the woman was married to both brothers at different times in her life. I feel like that situation should have more heat on it than the fact that they were an anti-vaxxer. I am here to put on record that every single person I have interacted with in the freedom movement should not be painted with this brush, ever. I am making this video to put on record, just in case the authorities are planning to use this unrelated situation to come after people like us, like me. And this isn't the first time they've come after me. So let's go through a range of different articles that I've put together, and I'll put every link in the description in order of how I show it. So I'm not going to go through every article in detail. I'm just going to show you the highlighted ones. Anti-government extremists known as sovereign citizens have been identified as potential terrorism threats in Australia by a confidential New South Wales police report. Now, this was an article from 2015, but I believe it is still relevant because they've been ramping up trying to, criminalize sovereign citizen anti-government behavior for a long time. And I mean, not violent ones, but innocent ones. So these are all articles from the actual incident, and I just want to read you these bits. So blend of anti-government, anti-law enforcement, and anti-vaccination views that have been reflected in social media posts and videos. Now, in theory, there is nothing wrong with being anti-government, anti-law enforcement, and anti-vaccination as long as you're peaceful and you're not violent. There is nothing wrong with having opinions against these things. Add to the cocktail of perspectives the various conspiracy theories, a pinch of sovereign citizen ideology, fringe religious or spiritual beliefs, and a survivalist mindset evidenced by the trained move to live off the power grid, arm themselves, and fortify their property. There is nothing wrong with having fringe religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs, or planning to live off grid. There's nothing wrong with that at all. In some situations, that would be heroed. Now, of course, all of this should play a role in the murder investigation, but it should not be highlighted as the main reason for their mental instability. So conspiracy theories, radicalization is not new, but it is absolutely clear from events here and around the world that conspiracy theories, disinformation, and misinformation, problems as old as time, are being turbocharged by technology into terrible acts of violence. So again, it's a pretty far stretch to go from conspiracy theory to murder, right? They are presenting a new kind of threat to our national security. There will be deep and very important policy questions for us here as a parliament. So they are going to use this incident as a way to push legislation. So we're going to have to be really mindful of what's going on. Were they conspiracy theorists? Reports have suggested the trio were conspiracy theorists. Conspiracy theorists, the definition is so broad, it's ridiculous, to be honest. Prolific user of known conspiracy sites. Okay, I'd like to know which ones, because not all of them are violent. In fact, hardly any of them are, with posts laced with anti-authority and anti-police rhetoric. Stacey Train is reported to have quit her teaching job rather than comply with COVID-19 vaccine mandates. Again, completely irrelevant. Maybe it's relevant internally with the actual case itself, but it is not relevant for mainstream media to air this sort of thing. Anyway, moving on. So now they're talking about the town where the three people are from. Mr. Bagori says there is tension between the laid-back country town atmosphere of live and let live and the conspiratorial rhetoric that recently found its way into town, trying to say that the murders it was recent because this rhetoric has just come into town. These conspiracies aren't local, he said, but it happened here. At the pub, someone mentions anti-vaccination slogans have reappeared in chalk on popular walking track near the lagoon. The virus, then it is not a vaccine. So, okay, anti-vaccine sentiment on concrete in chalk, shock horror. That's not really a crime. Stacey Train was a teacher we already read that. Sources close to the family say the trio strongly opposed vaccinations. Again, should have very little bearing on the murder itself. She does not. This is the MP in the area and member for Warrego and Lee. She does not want the small town written off as a conspiracy zone. For goodness sakes. There were no freedom rallies in Tara. Freedom rallies were extremely peaceful. I don't know what that has to do with anything. All right, let's move on. Peter Dutton blasts conspiracies. Australians should be concerned about the rise of authoritarian lunacy in the wake of Monday's shooting tragedy, Peter Dutton says. Anti-authoritarian lunacy. Have you seen what the authorities have done to us over the last 2 years? How can we not be anti-authority? What do you expect? The authorities put me in prison for 22 days just for promoting a protest, and you expect me to love authority? But this has nothing to do with the murders. This is what's crazy. Dutton called for tightening regulations on encrypted messaging services that would allow conspiracy theories to be shared. That is extremely concerning, guys. Police are looking extensively into the Train brothers' online activities, which they should, including their possible involvement in extremist conspiracy groups and forums. My concern here is, what do they consider extremist? because they might consider Reignite Democracy Australia extremist, even though we never condone violence or extreme conspiracies in any way, shape, or form. But who defines what extremist is? Dutton says the anti-government rhetoric being shared should concern any right-thinking Australian. I think what your government has done, Dutton, should really concern any Australian. But anyway, now I'm going to move on to legislation. Now, keep in mind what he said about that they should change. Where did he say that? That they should change legislation on encrypted messaging services. This is going to play a role in what I'm about to show you. So now I'm going to go through the Surveillance Legislation Amendment, Identify and Disrupt Bill 2021. And I have to tell you that this bill passed in 2021. Now, here's a summary of the amendments. So the ACIC, which is the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, can disrupt data by modifying, adding, copying, or pasting data in order to frustrate the commission of serious offences online. They can collect intelligence or serious criminal activity by permitting access to the device and networks used to facilitate criminal activity. They can take over a person's online account for the purpose of gathering evidence to further a criminal investigation. Now, my concern here is that an offence is a very broad term these days, because I committed 2 criminal offences just for publishing a protest poster and for attending a protest. So if they consider that a criminal offence, then a lot of what people like me do could be considered a criminal offence, and they could actually log into my accounts and actually post on my behalf. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of hoops to jump through before they do that, but the fact that in theory that they can, there's a lot of legislation that's out there, like the pandemic bill in Victoria, where in theory they can do A, B, and C, but they haven't done it because probably there's a lot of things that need to be ticked off before they can. But it's a concern, and it needs to be watched tightly. And the fact that they're using this incident in this way is making me concerned that they're going to start using this legislation. So here is the actual legislation. And again, I'll put it in the link at the description because I'm only going to read the yellow bits, and there's a lot more. So they want to collect intelligence that relates to criminal networks of individuals, which we are considered criminals in some respects. So they want to access data held on a computer in relation to collection of intelligence that relates to a criminal network of individuals, whether in the form of text, data, speech, visual images, sound, forms, combination of forms, etc. But the most worrying part is criminal networks of individuals in an electronically linked group of individuals where one or more individuals in the group have engaged, are engaged, or are likely to engage, in conduct that constitutes a relevant offence. So they are painting us as extremists, even though we are not. So would that constitute likely to engage? If they can paint these murderers as their full intention of the murders was because they were anti-vaccine, anti-authority, etc., is that enough to constitute likely to engage? Are facilitating or likely to facilitate the engagement by another person, whether or not an individual in the group, in conduct that constitutes a relevant offence. These terms are so broad, and with the corrupt government that we have trying to silence any anti-government narrative, this is really concerning. I reject any new amendments that would consider the broad term anti-government as being criminal. It needs to be violent anti-government, not just anti-government. If they manage to pass legislation like this, Australia will no longer have free speech unless your speech is in line with the government narrative. And that is not freedom of speech, guys, obviously. These murders need a full and thorough investigation. And obviously, we all want to find out what really happened, and we want closure for the victims and their families. However, I will not allow the government to use this broad brush term in order to push some sort of agenda that all anti-government, anti-vaccine, anti-authority groups and individuals are violent and need to be monitored or treated like criminals. I would actually argue that this is extremely disrespectful to use such a tragedy of this magnitude to push a political agenda and attempt to silence moderate anti-vaccine, anti-government, anti-authority groups. The families of these victims deserve better than that. And I want to put on record Peter Dutton and mainstream media and ASIO and whoever, that we can all kind of see what you're trying to do. And I'm not actually pointing the finger and saying that you are specifically doing this, but I'm posing the question, is this what is happening? And forgive me for being concerned. I've been attacked by the government before. Of course I'm concerned, and we all need to be concerned, but find out what happened. Don't use it as a political weapon. That is it's just disgusting. It's just disgusting. So I hope that you watch this and you understand what I'm trying to say here. You are dividing Australia with this type of narrative. At least over 1 million, maybe 2 million Australians feel the same way I do about the way the last 2.5 years have been, with COVID and lockdowns and vaccination mandates and people losing their jobs and not being able to go across borders within cross-border communities, not being able to see their loved ones before they die, not having weddings and funerals. How can you expect everyone to love the government after that? And the fact that you are trying to criminalize anti-government sentiment is ridiculous. And you're taking away the freedoms of your future children. So be careful what legislation you pass, because you might silence a few people by doing what you're trying to do, but you are going to affect the freedom of this country. And that is more important than anything. I care less about me rotting in a jail cell than I do about your children. I know it's crazy, isn't it? It's crazy, but I actually give a crap about the next generation of Australia, and everything that I have done and many other organizations and people have done during this time was to help you and your children. We wanted your children to go to school. We wanted your children to not have suicidal thoughts and terrible mental illnesses from being locked down. We wanted you to go to weddings and funerals. That's all we were doing this whole time. Like, we actually have genuine purpose and reasons to be doing this. What is your motivation? Are you just trying to silence us? Or are you going to silence the next generations? Think about what you're doing before you do it. I'm counting on God and human nature, sympathy, and the goodness of humans to prevail, but we'll be watching this very closely.